Many people reacted with outrage to news that convicted rapist and former tennis coach Bob Hewitt would be released on parole next week. But his parole has now been suspended after Justice Minister Ronald Lamola ordered a review of that decision. Lamola said he'd noted the lack of victim participation in the parole process. Hewitt applied for parole after serving 3 years of his 6-year sentence. Our guests this morning are Olivia Jasriel, she's a rape survivor, Lamprecht from Women and Men Against Child Abuse, and Singabakho Nxumalo, who is Correctional Services spokesperson. We're going to be discussing the parole process from Correctional Services point of view and how this particular issue unfolded with Bob Hewitt. Good to have every one of you here. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thanks, Leon.
Olivia, I'm going straight to you because I think you're the one we need to speak to, and you are one of the victims who came out very vocal about what happened. How did you feel when you initially heard that Bob Hewitt was going to get parole?
I was first a little bit shocked, and then this intense anger set in. I just felt very failed by the whole system, especially in light of the fact that I knew, what the processes should have been. Yeah. And then to hear that, it was like, where do we go from here? What do we do? So I just felt dismally failed.
So you heard absolutely nothing. Did you hear how we heard that Bob Hewitt was now going to get parole? Did you hear anything beforehand?
Not a word, not a word. My attorney phoned me and she said, I need to be sitting down and she's got something to tell me.
When did you get this phone call?
On Thursday morning at about 10 o'clock. And she completely blindsided me. I did not see that coming.
Yeah.
And it was just, blindsided is the only word that I can think of.
So let's now talk to the nitty-gritty of parole, and perhaps this is where I'll bring you in to talk about the process, Singabakho, that Olivia went through as being very vocal, was at the court case, one of the victims, and this came to her like that this man is going to get parole, even though it has now been put on hold for a little bit because of the Justice Minister. But is this the way things should be done? Isn't there another way that the process should work?
The process is quite clear in terms of how we need to go about it. First thing that you need to understand is that parole is not the end of a sentence. In actual fact, the parole starts from when a person is admitted. To say, Leanne is admitted for this particular offense and is here to serve 6 years. And then to say, okay, we'll conduct the needs-based assessment to say what type of interventions, must be meted out to assist you in correcting that offending behavior. And then when we do that assessment, we even check, okay, when will you be considered for parole placement, meaning when will you have served the minimum required term, which in simple English is half of that, of the sentence. And then by that time, all these programs must have taken place. But that doesn't mean that automatically you then granted parole. It means then our specialist must then write, appropriate reports. Here I'm referring to your social workers, psychologists, criminologists, to say, is Leanne now fit, to continue serving a sentence in the community, meaning, that risk element. And then all that information is then compiled in your profile, which then goes to Correctional Supervision and Parole Board, which then checks, are you really suitable for parole placement? So there's quite a number of variables that they are looking at. But coming to this particular case, it has been very, very clear, even when going back to the era of Mr. Sibunda, still the minister coming to Mr. Masuta, and now with Minister Lamola, that the criminal justice system must be victim-centered, meaning even when you consider parole placement, the victim has to play a part in that. This would be your primary victim, even the secondary victims, to say, have you considered their views as well? So hence, with this particular case, when we learned about it, at first the statement issued was to say, we're waiting for the parole board to inform us if indeed they've, taken that particular decision. And when it came to our attention, then we picked up that one element was missing there, which is victim participation.
Which should be probably the most important one.
Which is also important. Hence, then the minister took the decision to say, no, let's allow this process to be reviewed so that we can ensure that, justice is done, which for us is very important. Hence, we have different layers.
How does something like this happen, Singabakho? I mean, if that one thing that you're talking about the victim, and this is where we are at as a country, is that the victim is almost the one who's like, nah, don't worry about the victim, it's fine. They seem to be at the bottom of the pool here of priorities. So, yay, Bob Hewitt has reached all of these things. We haven't spoken to the victim, so we'll leave it, but it's fine, he can still get parole. And this seems to be the case for everybody that is talking out about gender-based violence, that is talking about the fact that the law suits the criminal, not the victim. So how does something like this happen? How can a victim be sitting here and feeling this way?
The reason we have different layers to look into the parole process is specifically for this. If perhaps one of the factors were not followed thoroughly, for instance, if we know this particular case, as President may sound to say, was this done? Yes or no? And if not, to say, then we've got to attend to it. And then hence we said we needed the parole board to inform us whether they've reached that particular decision. And we've got to go through that due diligence process to say, no, hang on, you cannot place this particular inmate on parole when you haven't, completed this particular process. Hence, then them to say, no, let the review board now attend to this particular matter so that, justice can be done. But I will say we've got quite a number of other cases where they get followed throughout, in the right way, and where we ensure that victims do play a central role. And even in the past season, we even ran public education campaigns, because more often you find that not all victims are willing to participate. What we've been saying to them, we've got support programs, please come forward where we are unable to trace the victims, so that we can ensure that victims do play a role. Because it is quite sad when someone has offended you. Few years down the line, you meet that person, down the street, and you were not even aware that this person is now placed on parole. So as a department, it's important that we go through this particular process.
Luke, let me bring you into the process. You've heard from Correctional Services and how the department works and the parole board, and saying that they do follow processes and correctly. This, of course, is a high-profile case, hence we're talking about it. But today, there'll be a whole bunch happening. Yesterday they were, last week, all the time. Do they always follow the process right, or is there a problem with parole?
Look, I think there's a fundamental problem with parole. I think if you go back and look at how the whole criminal justice system is set up, and you look at what the President was saying, well, over in fact the last year since the Gender-Based Violence Conference, that we need to be victim-centred. From the time you go to the police, the accused is innocent until proven guilty. The state has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he is guilty, which means that the victim is lying until you can prove otherwise. He then goes to jail. And in this case, what I find quite disturbing, frankly, is the lack of transparency. So you've got all the coverage of the evidence, the witnesses who are the victims giving evidence. You have evidence in aggravation of sentencing, evidence in mitigation of sentencing. He then goes and presents mitigating circumstances to get a lesser sentence because of his age. So he already has a reduced sentence from the mitigation. Then the parole board comes in, which is completely non-transparent. And I think that's the fundamental issue. Because I'm hearing now for the first time from Correctional Services that there's some process in place for him to have an onus himself to prove that he has been rehabilitated. Mr. Hewitt has been completely remorseless, and in fact the judge in his judgment said that he's non-rehabilitatable. So there's a level at which I'm uncomfortable that the onus that Correctional Services is saying must be discharged by Mr. Hewitt to prove that he's now a member that can re-enter society, we as society have never heard. Yet the victim impact statements are sent off to the parole board, which I assume are made known to people, because why must Olivia not be okay for Mr. Hewitt to stay in jail? In fact, in spite of the fact that she has been abused, she can be okay, and he should still stay in jail. Because it doesn't mean because she's still a victim that he must still be incarcerated. So I think the whole thinking of it needs to shift. And Mr. Hewitt must prove to us that he's a person that can re-enter society in a way that shows that he doesn't deny that he did it. He doesn't deny the impact on his victims. In other words, he says that he did a bad thing, because he didn't say that in his evidence in mitigation. And then he must take full responsibility for what he did, and not say, well, he was set up or whatever.
I mean, From what we understand in this trial, Olivia, there were 3 of you that came forward. And from what we've read is that only one of the victims has actually received one of these letters, the so-called parole letter.
That's correct, yes.
So you, as you mentioned earlier, you didn't receive this, no communication. I don't know how this happens.
You know what, neither do I. And it's quite devastating. And I've been severely traumatized by it. I have regressed, I cannot tell you how many years, because of what has happened this past few weeks, a few days.
I mean, if we look back already to the trial and the sentencing of 6 years, do you think that was fair? At the time, when 6 years was handed down, now 3 years has passed and he's looking for parole. I mean, is that enough punishment for what he did to your life?
Well, I've been handed a life sentence by him. I live with severe OCD. I live with severe trauma. You know, I have all the factors of having been abused and traumatized. I guess we just had to really just sit back and accept that he had been discounted and given us 6 years. But 3 years, I don't understand how 3 years actually even begins to cover how he has destroyed numerous lives and families. He completely destroyed my family.
Yeah. You know, and one would wonder if this would be getting this attention. Actually, not wonder. We know it wouldn't get this attention if it wasn't Bob Hewitt. And like you say, you could be walking through a shopping centre and you see the man that raped you walking free and you didn't even know this. So one victim gets a letter out of 3. How does something, again I ask you, why is this slipping by? Yes, the minister got wind of it because it was in the media, but how does he monitor every single case in this country?
Remember, we said the criminal justice system in its entirety needs to be victim-centered. From even when a person is going through the court system, because in most cases, victims go there as witnesses. And in some cases, others will not even attend the sentencing. They wouldn't even know when that person was sentenced and when is this person serving that particular sentence. Hence, as a department, we even decided to employ more auxiliary social workers, trying to locate, you know, the victims of their whereabouts and invite them, because our logic as Correctional Services says the victim needs to be aware from when a person is admitted to say, this person is going to be here for 6 years. These are the programs, so that the victim gets to know if indeed this person is being rehabilitated, so that come the time when one is considered for parole, at least there is some sense of some comfort. It may not be 100% comfort, but at least you know that some interventions, you know, have been done. The reason why we have then parole boards, for many years we were criticized for being the referent player. To say Correctional Services, you can't rehabilitate and then decide that now a person must be placed on parole. Hence then, you know, the Act then made effect to say we need to have these parole boards. But as Correctional Services, we still play a role there, because we're the ones who take a file of that particular inmate to say to the parole board, here's a profile of this person. Then the parole board must check, you know, whether this person indeed is fit. But then when we pick up that certain things we know were not done, we also have a duty to raise such things, hence even with this particular case. And we have about 75,000 people who are on parole in this country, and people who are complying with parole conditions is 98%, but yes, percentages are nice. When you check in terms of real numbers, people who reoffend or break, you know, the parole conditions, about 700 plus. With us, that is still a number that we are not comfortable, because we want 100%, so that, you know, when we say to the public, our rehabilitation works indeed to have 100%, but we know 100% is mostly impossible. But then we say to ourselves, all processes, you know, needs to, you know, follow due diligence. Even with this particular case, the reason it has to be reviewed is because everyone must feel that, you know what, I've played a part. And this is not the only unique case. You may remember the case of Eugene de Kock, when the minister said, after having checked, I could see that, you know, a number of victims were not consulted. Yeah. And then hence we had that duty to say, no, hold on, get people to participate.
Yeah, yes. So will there be a participation? What has happened since the news broke, since this, of course, was then put on hold by the minister? What's happened since now?
Nothing.
Okay. So
we haven't been engaged. We haven't heard anything. We're just waiting now.
All right. What should happen, Luke?
Look, in my opinion, firstly, the first thing is the onus should rest on Mr. Hewitt, as has been said by Correctional Services, to convince us that he is a rehabilitated person who's eligible for parole, rather than the victims needing to again go or again make statements to keep him in jail. The parole board needs to consider the fact that he was already in mitigation, because this was a rape of a child case. The sentence was already less than what it should have been. 2 of those years were suspended. So in other words, of the 8 he actually got, he was serving 6.
Yeah.
So in other words, half of his sentence is 4, not 3, because it's actually 8 years. So there's like 3 or 4 levels at which he was already been given leniency, and now they come back to the victims and ask the victim for impact statements. What difference should it make if one victim is okay and one victim's not okay? Mr. Hewitt should show that he is a person that has understood the wrongfulness of his actions, is rehabilitated and will not reoffend, and we as the public need to be convinced of that.
Yeah. And at
and
this
it needs
point
to
you're
be more
not.
transparent as a result.
Yeah.
So it needs to be, in my opinion, more public. The trials and Olivia's testimony, it's very public. Why is his rehabilitation not public?
Yeah, yeah. You know, we heard yesterday the president speaking out about gender-based violence. We hearing that it's at the highest levels and the actions that need to be taken here as a country. But I mean, you know, this particular case, I mean, this is exactly what it's all about. These are children that have been raped by a man all these years later, still having to face victimization by the system, being traumatized. And as one victim described it, she feels like she's been raped by the system again by hearing about this parole. So, you know, what would you like to see done, Olivia? Let me begin with you. What do you want to see happen in this?
In this particular case,
in
or
your
just
case,
in my
absolutely.
case particularly, I don't believe he should go home. I believe that he needs to pay for what he has done to me and the other ladies. And going home and sitting out the next few years of his life in the comfort and luxury of his home, it's not okay, not on any level.
Yeah.
I don't have the privilege of all the things that he's going to go home to. I'm still trying to pick myself up from 4 years ago.
Yeah. So, realistically speaking, if you had to go before the parole board, there is no way you would say it's fine, because it's not fine.
It's not fine. You know, and if I've looked at my psychological reports, and I'm in therapy, I'm back in therapy again. You know, my psychological reports don't show anything close to being fine. And it's really, really tiring and really, really hard work for me to just be okay every day.
Yeah. If you do look at the situation as a country, and I know it's hard, but because I suppose a lot of people look to you, I mean, there may be women that are sitting out there as victims as well and going through what you're going through. You know, we're shouting out about gender-based violence, we're shouting out about the treatment of women in this country and victims. The situation is as bad as we're making it out to be, from what I'm understanding. It's not, this isn't made up. This is bad.
It's
and I mean,
real.
you're a living testimony of it.
It's very, very real. You know, and us as women and children, and I see it as well, continuously, we just disregard it. And our rights, our basic human rights, are completely ignored.
Yeah. Luke, working with people on a daily basis about this, what do you feel needs to happen from, you heard some of the proposals put forward yesterday, and the president has asked that people come forward, give ideas. What are we going to do? What do you think should happen?
Well, in relation to this particular grouping that we're talking about now, which is incarcerated offenders, you hear the president saying life must be life. So, I mean, automatically, well, pretty much automatically, when you get incarcerated, you're eligible for parole. I mean, as Correctional Services has said. So if you're going to give evidence, and that evidence is led by experts, etc., I would like to know, there should be transparency. Who is the parole board? What are their qualifications? How did they make these decisions? What evidence did they hear? I would like it to be public, like the trial of Hewitt was. Yeah. And I would like for us to be able to have a look at that process in a transparent way and say, are we as a public satisfied that they are meeting the mandate that we as the public have given them to correct? Even if the punitive part they believe they have done and they have successfully corrected, why are we as the public not able to see and be party to what the decisions were and how they were made, and who made those decisions? Because I believe this parole board was a purely male board.
Yeah. And that doesn't help either.
No.
I mean, that
No,
really
that
doesn't help. So let's just start wrapping this up. Singabakho, in terms of Olivia not even hearing anything yet, it's Thursday. This is a week that's passed now, and she's heard nothing. Is this the right course of action? Shouldn't she have heard something by now? And what's happening behind the scenes? Perhaps you can fill us in.
I can just explain. How the review board structure works is that it's not like it's a structure which is always there sitting. We have what we call National Council for Correctional Services, which is like an advisory body to the minister on policy issues. They also process parole for people who are doing life. And then what will then happen from the National Council of Correctional Services, then a High Court judge will have to chair the review board. Then there will be someone nominated by the Director of Public Prosecutions to also sit there. There will also be public representatives going there. So it's a structure with really people of high quality and people of relevant experience. Then they will go through that process. Then the victims will be notified, everyone involved, to say you've got to come make presentations. They will then explain the entire process. But the delays perhaps in the victim not being informed now is because that structure needs to be put together. Okay. And then once everything is set, and then that communication will then start with everyone affected by this particular case. Why the structure is set up like that is to ensure that we close all the gaps, the loopholes, so that at the end of the day you have an outcome that people can find some comfort with, can feel that indeed justice was done.
Yeah. Yes. All right. We leave it there for now, but we thank you very much for coming in and talking to us, because I think that this is it's a case that speaks volumes about where we're at as a country, and we thank you so much, Olivia, for being the voice of it, because it's not easy to do something like this, and we thank you and we wish you strength through this entire process. Luke Lamprecht is from Women and Men Against Child Abuse. Singabakho Nxumalo is the Correctional Services spokesperson. Of course, Olivia Jasriel, who is a survivor from Bob Hewitt, and who is one of the victims who has spoken out and is brave enough to come and talk to us as well about her experience through all of this. Let's take a break. We'll have news for you after this. Do stay tuned.
As far as Old Mutual is concerned, the chapter about Mr. Moyo being CEO at Old Mutual is now closed. Yes.
The board was very concerned when it came across certain information that hadn't been given to it and discovered that things had gone horribly wrong.
He said that they are not ignoring the judgment.
We were actually told by the head of security in that building that they were told that they could not grant me access.
What do you think is disincentive?